I never thought I'd be the kind of man who had to question the motives of his own family. Yet life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. My name is Richard Hale. I built everything I own with my bare hands. Years of running a small construction business that grew into something far larger than I ever imagined. I've always lived quietly, never flashing my wealth, because to me, respect mattered more than luxury. But people like my daughter's husband, Daniel, never look past the shine of a coin. When Daniel first walked into our lives, he seemed like every father's dream, polite, attentive, full of ambition. He dressed sharp, spoke smoothly, and carried himself like a man with a plan. My daughter Emily was over the moon. She believed she had found her soulmate, and as a father, I wanted to trust her judgment. But something about Daniel's smile never reached his eyes. Behind the charm, there was a hunger, a sharp, greedy edge he couldn't hide from me. At dinners, he'd steer conversations toward business and money. He'd compliment the house, remark on how spacious it was, ask about the locks on the doors as if it were casual curiosity. He'd glance at the antique cabinet where I kept a few heirlooms, family treasures with more sentimental value than monetary worth. I'd answer politely, but inside I kept my guard up. Still, I said nothing. I didn't want to be the bitter father-in-law who mistrusted his daughter's choice. Emily would laugh at his jokes, look at him with sparkling eyes, and I couldn't bear to break her happiness with my doubts. But I knew people like Daniel. I'd seen them in business, men who acted like friends, shook your hand with a smile, and then looked for the first opportunity to stab you in the back. I told myself I was probably imagining it. Maybe I was being overprotective, maybe too hard on the man. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Daniel wasn't here for love alone. He was watching, studying, waiting for something, and soon enough, I would learn just how right my instincts had been. The weeks that followed only strengthened my unease about Daniel. He wasn't careless. No, he was far too clever for that. His words were polished, his actions rehearsed. But when you've spent your life dealing with contractors, business rivals, and opportunists, you learn how to spot the subtle cracks in a man's mask. One evening, after Sunday dinner, Daniel lingered in the living room while Emily and my wife, Sarah, cleared the table. He looked around the house with an admiration that felt practiced. His eyes traced the corners, the security cameras, the doors leading down to the basement. Then with a casual laugh, he asked, "So, Richard, where do you keep the good stuff? A man like you must have a safe hidden somewhere." I smiled politely, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a real answer. "The good stuff," I said, "is sitting at the table with my wife and daughter." He chuckled, but there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. He wanted information. I had given him none. It didn't stop there. Over time, Daniel's questions grew bolder, masked as curiosity. He asked about my construction business, my retirement savings, even whether I'd ever considered downsizing to a smaller house. Emily brushed it off as harmless conversation, but I heard the subtext loud and clear. He was probing for weaknesses, inventorying my life like a thief planning a heist. The first real confirmation of my suspicions came during a barbecue at our home. Daniel had invited one of his old friends, a wiry man named Vince with sharp features and restless eyes. Vince barely spoke to anyone except Daniel, but I caught them whispering by the garage, their heads bent close together, their voices low. When I stepped out with a tray of drinks, they jumped apart, their laughter far too forced to be genuine. That night, I replayed every moment in my head. Daniel's friend wasn't just visiting for burgers and beer. They were plotting. Of that, I was certain. I decided to test Daniel, to push him just enough to see how he reacted. At dinner the following week, I casually mentioned that I kept a few valuable heirlooms from my father. Old war medals, a watch passed down through generations. Nothing extravagant but priceless to me. I watched Daniel's face carefully. His smile widened, his eyes lit up, and though he tried to mask it with a sip of wine, I saw the spark of greed flicker there. Later that night, Sarah accused me of being paranoid. "He's just curious," she said gently. "He's young, Richard. He admires you. Don't turn this into something it isn't." But I knew better. Admiration doesn't come with whispers in the garage and questions about safes. Admiration doesn't smell like greed. The breaking point came when I accidentally overheard a phone call. Daniel had stepped outside on the patio, speaking in hushed tones. I had gone to close the sliding door when his words froze me in place. "Don't worry," he whispered. "The old man's got it all set up, but he's too careful. We'll need to do it when he's out, maybe late at night. Trust me, it'll be easy. He won't know what hit him." I stood in the dark, my blood boiling, every muscle tight. He thought I was naive, an old man too blind to see what was right in front of me. But I'd spent my life preparing for men like Daniel. If he thought he could rob me, he was walking straight into a trap he didn't even know existed. That night, I sat in my study long after everyone had gone to bed. The house was silent, the only sound the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. My playbook, you could say. Years of running a business had taught me to prepare for betrayal, to document, to plan. Every name, every debt, every lesson learned, it was all there. And now, I began a new page. Daniel. I didn't go to the police, not yet. I wanted proof. More importantly, I wanted Daniel to show his true face to Emily. If I simply accused him, she'd defend him blindly. Love makes fools of even the wisest hearts. No, I needed him to fall into his own trap, with his greed laid bare for everyone to see. So I waited. I played the part of the trusting father-in-law, smiling at his jokes, pretending not to notice the way his eyes lingered on locked doors or hidden corners of the house. I kept my routine steady, my habits predictable, until I could almost feel his anticipation rising. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. Daniel was circling closer, like a wolf testing the fence. But he didn't realize the fence was electrified. I didn't have to wait long before Daniel's mask began to slip further. Greed has a way of eroding patience, and soon the small hints grew into bold missteps. He thought he was clever, subtle even, but every time he spoke or acted, I saw the cracks widening. One Saturday evening, Emily and Daniel came over for dinner. While Emily and Sarah were in the kitchen, Daniel and I sat in the living room. He pretended to scroll on his phone, but I caught the way he tilted it, trying to hide the screen from me. When he got up to use the bathroom, he left the phone face down on the coffee table. Call it instinct, but I picked it up. A text thread was still open. "When's the old man out? We need the exact timing. I'll bring the gear." The message was from someone named V. Daniel had replied, "Relax, he's in bed by 10. The safe's downstairs." "Just follow my lead." I set the phone back down as quickly as I'd picked it up. My pulse was steady, my breathing calm, but inside me the fire burned hotter than ever. So it was true. He wasn't just toying with the idea. He was planning it, actively, with help. When Daniel returned, I smiled and asked if everything was all right. He nodded, oblivious to the fact that I'd just seen his betrayal in black and white. That night, as I lay in bed beside Sarah, I stared at the ceiling, thinking through my next move. I could have woken her, told her everything right there. But what good would that have done? She would have confronted Emily, who would have rushed to defend Daniel. That was the pattern. Love makes blind defenders out of honest people. No, I needed more than texts. I needed action, proof, and I needed Daniel to step directly into the trap with no way out. Over the next week, I subtly fed the fire of his greed. I left an old jewelry box slightly visible in my study, filled with nothing more than worthless trinkets. I made casual comments about being too old to carry heavy things down to the basement, about rarely opening the safe where I kept the important stuff. I watched his eyes narrow with interest each time, like a predator catching the scent of blood. Meanwhile, I prepared. The safe in the basement didn't hold what Daniel thought it did. The real valuables, documents, bonds, and the few family heirlooms of actual worth were locked away off-site in a bank deposit box. The safe at home? It contained decoys, stacks of newspaper cut to look like bundles of cash, a few fake gold bars I'd picked up years ago as a prank gift, and a motion-triggered camera hidden neatly above the shelf. If Daniel wanted to rob me, he'd find exactly what I wanted him to find, and it would all be recorded. Then came the night I overheard him again. I'd stepped into the backyard to put out the trash when I caught his voice on the phone. He was pacing by his car, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "Yeah, it's happening this weekend," he said. "The old man goes to bed early. By midnight, we're out. He won't even know what hit him. Trust me, Vince, we'll be set after this. I slipped back into the house, silent as a shadow. My heart wasn't racing with fear, it was calm, methodical. Because now I knew the break-in wasn't a question of if, it was when. The following day, Emily called me, excited. "Dad, Daniel wants to take me away for the weekend." "A little getaway, just the two of us." I forced a smile into my voice. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." "You deserve it. It was perfect." Daniel was creating an alibi, leaving his wife out of harm's way while he staged the robbery. He thought he was clever, but what he didn't know was that I had already set the stage. When Saturday arrived, Emily and Daniel left in the morning, bags packed, laughter spilling out as they drove away. By late afternoon, I saw Daniel's car return quietly down the street. Emily wasn't with him. Instead, Vince stepped out from the passenger seat, his narrow face twitching with excitement. Through the curtains, I watched them approach, dressed in dark clothes, backpacks slung over their shoulders. They thought the house was empty. They thought I was asleep. I moved to my study, checking the monitors. Every angle of the house was covered by cameras. Front door, back patio, even the basement stairwell. I watched as Daniel and Vince crept around to the side entrance, tools in hand. Within minutes, the lock gave way and they slipped inside. I didn't move immediately. Let them sweat. Let them think they were winning. They whispered as they moved through the halls, Daniel guiding Vince toward the basement door. "This way," Daniel muttered. "It's right downstairs. By the time he wakes up, we'll be long gone." I followed silently, my footsteps deliberate, my presence hidden in the shadows. Every sound they made echoed in my ears, the squeak of the floorboards, the jingle of Vince's tools, the creak of the basement door opening. And there it was. The trap had been sprung. They thought they were about to steal from a tired old man. But what they didn't realize was that I had been waiting for this very moment, watching them step by step, waiting for them to reveal their true selves. It was no longer just suspicion. No longer whispers or stolen glances. This was betrayal in its rawest form, and I was ready to meet it head-on. The house was dark, the kind of darkness that feels deliberate, thick, silent, waiting. From the monitors in my study, I watched Daniel and his partner slip inside like shadows. They thought they were hunters. In truth, they were walking straight into a cage. Daniel led the way, flashlight in hand, his voice a low whisper. "Come on, Vince, keep it down." "The old man's upstairs." "He won't hear a thing," Vince chuckled under his breath. "Easy score. You said he's loaded, right?" "This place screams money," I almost laughed at their arrogance. They believed age meant weakness, that quiet living meant ignorance. But I hadn't built my life by being blind. Every hallway, every door, every corner of my home was prepared. They crept past the dining room, the beam of light flashing across family photos on the wall. Daniel paused at one, Emily's graduation picture. For a moment, his mask faltered. He stared at his wife's smiling face, then shook his head and moved on. Even greed couldn't erase guilt completely. I followed them silently, steps measured, weight shifted on the edges of my feet the way I'd been trained decades ago. Old habits never die. They just wait for their time to resurface. Down the stairs they went, into the basement. Daniel whispered, "It's right here." "He's got a safe." "I've seen it." The safe stood against the far wall, a heavy steel box bolted into concrete. They approached like moths to a flame. Vince pulled out his tools, eager, hands trembling with anticipation. "5 minutes, and this thing's ours," he muttered. I stepped into the doorway, still hidden by shadow, and watched. The safe wasn't locked tight, it was rigged. The second the door opened, the motion-triggered camera blinked to life, recording every detail, their faces, their hands, the betrayal carved into each movement. "Got it," Vince whispered, twisting the dial with practiced skill. The lock clicked. The safe swung open. Instead of stacks of cash or glittering gold, their flashlight revealed bundles of paper, newspapers cut into bills, phony gold bars stacked neatly, and one single envelope resting on top. Daniel frowned, confusion etched on his face. He grabbed the envelope, tore it open, and froze. Inside was a note written in my hand. "You think I wouldn't see this coming?" The flashlight shook in his grip. "What the hell?" he whispered. That was my moment. I stepped out of the shadows, Slow, steady, every inch of me calm. "Looking for something, Daniel?" They spun around, eyes wide. The flashlight beam hit my face. Daniel's jaw dropped. Vince swore under his breath, reaching instinctively for the crowbar at his side. But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, hands behind my back, gaze fixed on Daniel. "You were supposed to be in bed," he stammered. "Emily? Emily!" I cut him off, voice low and sharp. "Don't you dare say her name in this basement. Not tonight. Tonight, you're not her husband." "You're just a thief." Silence. The weight of it pressed against the walls. Vince tried to play tough. "Look, old man, nobody has to get hurt. Just let us walk out of here and—" "Quiet," I snapped, eyes still locked on Daniel. "This isn't about you, Vince. You're just a desperate fool following another fool. This is about him." Daniel's breathing quickened. He looked from the fake bundles in the safe to me, realization dawning. "You knew. You set this up. From the moment you stepped into my home," I said, stepping closer. "I smelled it on you. Greed, hunger. You didn't marry my daughter. You married the idea of my money. And tonight you've proved me right." Vince raised the crowbar, anger rising. "We don't need to listen to this. Let's just take him out and—" Before he finished, I reached into my pocket and held up a small device. A red light blinked on it. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Try something. Every word, every move, every fingerprint of yours is being recorded right now." "Police are already on their way." Vince froze, crowbar trembling in his grip. His eyes darted to Daniel, panic spreading across his face. "You didn't tell me he was— Jesus, you said he was just some old man." Daniel's face went pale. I didn't think I what?" I interrupted, stepping closer until I was inches from him. "Didn't think I'd fight back? Didn't think I'd be ready? Or didn't think I was smart enough to see through you?" He backed away, words failing him. His confident facade had crumbled, replaced by fear and shame. The sound of sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer. Daniel's eyes darted around, desperate, searching for escape. But I'd locked the basement door behind me. There was no way out. "You wanted riches," I said softly, almost like a whisper. "But all you've found tonight is truth. And truth is far heavier than gold." The sirens drew nearer, red and blue lights beginning to flash faintly through the basement windows. Vince dropped the crowbar, hands shaking. "I'm not going down for this, man. I didn't even—" "You already did." I cut him off. "The moment you stepped into my house, you sealed your fate." Daniel fell to his knees, the note from the envelope crumpled in his hand. He looked up at me, eyes wide with desperation. "Please, don't tell Emily, don't let her see me like this. I can explain." I crouched down, meeting his gaze. "There's no explanation that changes what you did. You had a choice, Daniel. You could have built a life with her. Earned my respect, earned my trust. Instead, you chose betrayal." Heavy footsteps pounded up the driveway. The sirens cut off. A voice shouted outside, "Police! Open the door!" I leaned closer, voice cold and steady. "When they come down here, you'll confess. Every word, or I'll make sure Emily sees the footage herself. Either way, your lies end tonight." Daniel lowered his head, shoulders trembling. Vince muttered curses under his breath, already defeated. I straightened, walked to the basement door, and unlocked it. The officers stormed inside, guns drawn, eyes sweeping the room. "Down here," I called calmly. Caught them red-handed. As the officers moved in, cuffing Vince and Daniel, I stood to the side, arms folded, my expression unreadable. Daniel looked back at me one last time, his face pale, eyes full of regret. But regret changes nothing once betrayal is complete. The safe door stood open behind him, its contents worthless, mocking his greed. And in that moment I realized justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes, the greatest justice was letting a man destroy himself with his own choices. And Daniel had done exactly that. The police hauled Daniel and Vince out of the basement in handcuffs. Their heads bowed, faces pale beneath the flashing blue and red lights. Neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering, craning their necks to see the commotion. It was a humiliating fall for a man who had strutted into our family with polished shoes and a fake smile, convinced he was cleverer than all of us. Emily's car pulled into the driveway just as the officers were shoving the two of them into the back of separate cruisers. She stepped out, confusion painted across her face, suitcase still in hand. "Dad, what's going on?" "Why is Daniel—" Her words stopped, her eyes widening at the sight of her husband cuffed and shoved into a squad car. For a brief moment, I wanted to shield her, to protect her from the truth. But lies had already brought us to this moment. More lies wouldn't save her. "Come inside, Emily," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of what had just unfolded. We sat in the living room, the faint glow of police lights flickering through the curtains. She stared at me, waiting for answers. Her hands trembled slightly, though whether from fear or anger, I couldn't tell. "Your husband," I began slowly, "thought it was a good idea to rob me tonight. He planned it for weeks. He had help. They broke in, went straight for the safe, and I caught them red-handed." She shook her head, her voice breaking. No, you must be mistaken. Daniel wouldn't." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "I have footage, audio, his texts. He admitted everything right here in this house. He wasn't just careless, Emily, he was deliberate. He thought I was an old fool who wouldn't see him coming." Her tears came then, hot and angry. "But why? Why would he do this?" I took a long breath. This was the part she needed to hear most. "Because from the moment I met him, I knew what kind of man he was. I've seen his type before. Charming, smooth-talking, but shallow. They see opportunity, not love. He didn't marry you, Emily. He married what he thought he could take from me." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. My heart broke for her, but I also knew the truth would set her free from the illusion Daniel had built. After a long silence, she finally asked, How did you know? How were you ready for this?" And that was when the second truth came out. The truth about me. I leaned back, my voice calm but firm. "You know I ran a construction company. You know I built everything we have from nothing. But what you don't know, Emily, is what came before that. I wasn't just a builder. Before I started this life, I served in the military, intelligence division. My job was spotting lies, reading people, staying 10 steps ahead of anyone who thought they could fool me. That part of me never went away. It's why I saw through Daniel when you couldn't. It's why I set the trap before he even made his move." Her eyes widened, realization dawning. You planned this whole thing?" "From the moment he asked me about safes and valuables," I said. "Every decoy, every camera, every little breadcrumb I left for him, it was all designed to draw him in. He thought he was outsmarting me, but really he was walking exactly where I wanted him to go." Emily was silent, her tears drying on her cheeks, her mind racing. "So what happens now?" "That," I said softly, "depends on him. He can face the police, the courts, the charges, all the evidence is against him. Or he can face you. He'll have to confess, and you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to spend your life with. But understand this, Emily. Tonight you've seen his true face. You can't unsee it. You can't unhear his betrayal. The choice to believe in him again or to walk away is yours." Her breathing steadied, her voice trembling but firm. "He betrayed me." "He betrayed you? I don't care about the money, Dad. I care that he lied to me, that he thought he could throw everything away for greed." I nodded slowly, proud of her strength. "That's the truth I wanted you to see. Money can be replaced. Trust cannot. And when a man shows you his real character, you believe him the first time." We sat together in silence, the weight of everything settling between us. Outside, the police cars drove away, taking Daniel and Vince with them. The night grew quiet again, but the peace felt different, broken yet cleansing, as though the poison had finally been drawn from the wound. Emily leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, just as she had when she was a little girl. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for protecting me, even from the truth I didn't want to see." I placed my hand gently over hers. "That's what fathers do. We don't always tell you what you want to hear, but we'll always stand in the way of anyone who means you harm, even if it's the man you thought you loved." In that moment, I knew the worst was behind us. The betrayal had been exposed, the mask ripped away. Daniel had come for riches, but what he found was something far more devastating. A father's foresight, sharpened by years of experience, and a daughter's love that could not be stolen. And as the house grew still again, I promised myself one thing: this would be the last time anyone mistook me for an old fool. The following weeks unfolded like the turning of a slow, heavy wheel, each day grinding forward, pressing Daniel closer to the fate he had earned. For me, it was a time of reflection, a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. I had protected my family, but the scars of betrayal don't fade overnight. For Emily, it was even harder. She had to face the collapse of her marriage in the harshest light possible, every detail dragged into the open. The police investigation moved swiftly. The evidence I provided, recordings, texts, camera footage, was airtight. There was no denying what Daniel had done. Vince, his partner in crime, cracked almost immediately, spilling everything to the authorities in the hope of a lighter sentence. He confessed how Daniel had approached him weeks earlier, promising an easy payday. Vince had no loyalty. He betrayed Daniel with the same ease Daniel had betrayed Emily. Daniel tried a different tactic. At first, he claimed innocence, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that Vince had pressured him into the scheme. But when confronted with his own messages, the ones I had seen on his phone, his voice faltered. The mask slipped again, and this time there was no charm left to hide behind. The trial was scheduled within 2 months. The courtroom was packed the day it began. Neighbors, reporters, curious onlookers. After all, it isn't every day that a respected businessman's son-in-law is caught attempting to rob his own family. The story had spread, twisted and amplified, until it became something of a local spectacle. I sat in the front row beside Emily, my hand steady over hers. She looked pale, but her jaw was set with quiet resolve. She had chosen to see the truth, to stop defending the indefensible. That decision alone had given her strength. Daniel entered, escorted by guards, dressed in an ill-fitting suit. His hair was unkempt, his eyes darting nervously. Gone was the polished, self-assured man who had once shaken my hand with rehearsed confidence. Now he looked small, like a child caught red-handed, stripped of all illusions of grandeur. The prosecution laid out the case with precision. The recordings of Daniel and Vince entering my house, the text detailing the plan, the camera footage of them breaking into the safe, Vince's testimony, damning and detailed. Every piece fell into place like bricks in a wall closing around him. Daniel's defense tried to argue desperation, claiming he had been drowning in debts and saw no other way out. But that excuse carried no weight with me or with the jury. Desperation doesn't justify betrayal, especially not betrayal of family. At one point, Daniel tried to meet my eyes across the courtroom. I stared back at him unflinching. For years, he thought he could manipulate me, twist my daughter's love into a shield for his greed. Now he saw me for what I truly was, a man who had seen through him from the beginning, a man who would never bow to his games. The trial lasted only 4 days. On the 5th, the jury returned with the verdict. Guilty on all counts, attempted burglary, conspiracy, and criminal mischief. Emily's breath caught when the words were read, and tears welled in her eyes. Not of sadness this time, but of release. The chains that bound her to Daniel had been broken. The judge looked down at Daniel, his tone stern but even. You didn't just break into a home. You betrayed the trust of a family, of a man who welcomed you as his own. That makes your crime even darker, and for that, you will serve your time accordingly. The sentence, 10 years in state prison. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. 10 years wasn't just a punishment. It was a lifetime for a man like Daniel, who thrived on appearances and charm. Behind bars, none of that would matter. His polished shoes, his rehearsed smile, his empty words, none of it would save him. Emily gripped my hand tighter, her voice barely a whisper. It's over, I nodded. Yes, it's over. But Daniel's punishment wasn't just prison. That was only the beginning. Word spread quickly through town, through business circles, through every friend and acquaintance he had tried to impress. His reputation crumbled overnight. The man who once bragged about investments and opportunities was now branded a thief, a fraud, a liar. His business associates cut ties, his so-called friends vanished, and even his family distanced themselves from the shame. In prison, Daniel learned a different kind of lesson. The reports we received from time to time painted a picture of a man stripped of his illusions. The charm that once served him in polite society earned him nothing behind bars. There, respect wasn't given for smooth talk, it was taken through strength and survival. Daniel, soft and spoiled by years of pretending, was forced to face the kind of men he once believed he was smarter than. Meanwhile, Emily began to heal. It wasn't easy. She mourned not just the marriage, but the years she had invested, the trust she had placed in someone unworthy. But healing came slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. She leaned on me, on her friends, on the truth she now accepted. She filed for divorce, and, though painful, it was the final step in freeing herself from Daniel's shadow. One evening, months after the trial, she sat with me on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She sipped her tea and said softly, "You knew all along, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. I didn't know every detail, but I knew his type. And when you've lived as long as I have, Emily, you learn to trust your instincts. People can lie. Their actions rarely do. She nodded, her eyes distant but calm. I wish I'd seen it sooner. You weren't meant to, I said. That's why you had me. Her hand found mine, and for the first time since the nightmare began, I saw peace in her face. As for me, I carried no bitterness, only clarity. Daniel had thought he was clever, that he could outwit the old man who stood in his way. But greed makes fools of even the most cunning, and in trying to rob me, he had robbed himself, of freedom, of respect, of family. The punishment fit the crime, not because of the years behind bars, but because it revealed his true self to the world. Stripped of pretense, Daniel was nothing, and nothing was exactly what he was left with. For me, the greatest victory wasn't his downfall. It was Emily's freedom. The storm had passed, but storms leave behind wreckage. In the months following Daniel's conviction, life settled into something quieter, steadier. Emily moved back into her childhood home for a while. At first it felt like a retreat, a return to safety, but slowly it became something else, a chance to rebuild. She threw herself into work, spending long hours at the design firm where she had always excelled, but never fully believed in herself. Without Daniel's shadow, without his constant need to be the center of everything, Emily began to shine. Her colleagues noticed. Clients trusted her. Promotions and recognition followed quickly. It wasn't just her career that blossomed. It was her confidence. At night, when she came home, we often sat together in the kitchen over cups of tea. Sometimes we talked about Daniel, though less and less as time went on. Other times we simply talked about life, about her dreams, about memories from her childhood. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter laugh freely, unburdened. As for me, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the nature of family and betrayal. Daniel had tested us, wounded us, but he had not broken us. If anything, he had reminded us both of something simple yet profound. Love built on truth is unshakable. Lies may glitter for a while, but they always rust. Emily eventually found the strength to move into her own place again. A small apartment in the city. Nothing extravagant, but it was hers. She decorated it with care. Plants by the windows, books on every shelf, colors that reflected her spirit. When I visited, I could see it in her eyes. She was proud. Proud of having carved out a space that was truly her own. No strings, no lies. One evening, as we stood by her balcony watching the city lights, she said, "You know, Dad, I thought Daniel was the love of my life. I thought I couldn't breathe without him. But now, I see that love isn't supposed to suffocate you. It's supposed to lift you." Her words warmed me. She had learned a lesson I had once feared would destroy her. Instead, it had strengthened her. As for Daniel, he faded from our conversations and eventually from our thoughts. Prison had claimed him, and whatever man he pretended to be before was gone. His letters, when they came, were left unopened. Emily had no desire to hear his apologies, his excuses, his pleas. She had moved on. That was punishment enough. In the quiet of my own life, I began to see my role differently. For years, I had carried the weight of being protector, guardian, provider. But now, watching Emily stand tall on her own, I realized my work was shifting. My duty wasn't to shield her anymore. It was to let her fly. And she did. She traveled for work, made new friends, even began to talk, hesitantly at first, about the idea of love again. But this time she was careful. Cautious but not afraid. She knew her worth, and she would never again settle for a man who saw her as anything less than a partner. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat in my garden surrounded by the hum of bees and the scent of roses, she said softly, "Dad, I know it hurt you too. What Daniel did, not just to me but to us. But thank you. Thank you for never letting me fall, even when I couldn't see the ground beneath me." I placed my hand over hers, my voice steady. "That's what fathers do, Emily. We don't stop the storms. But we make sure you know you'll never face them alone." The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the yard. In that moment, I felt peace, not just for myself, but for Emily. We had walked through betrayal, through heartbreak, through shame and anger. And on the other side, we had found something stronger. Life is never free of pain, but it is in the healing, in the rebuilding, that true strength reveals itself. Emily had found hers, and as her father, that was all I had ever wanted. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest wounds. Months turned into a year, and Daniel became nothing more than a shadow in our past, a mistake, a scar, a name we no longer needed to speak aloud. What lingered wasn't the betrayal, but the lesson it carried. For Emily, the lesson was simple but profound. Never mistake charm for character. She had once believed love was about being swept away, dazzled by promises and grand gestures. Now she understood that love was steadier, quieter, a bond built on trust, not performance. She no longer looked back with anger. She simply moved forward with clarity, her steps sure, her spirit unbroken. For me, the lesson ran deeper. I realized that age doesn't weaken us, it sharpens us if we allow it. Daniel had thought of me as an old man, easy to outwit. But wisdom, earned over years of trials and mistakes, is sharper than any knife. What he underestimated was not my strength, but my patience, my foresight, my unwillingness to bow to deceit. One evening, Emily and I took a walk along the old country road near our home. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of pine and earth. She walked with her head high, shoulders relaxed, no longer weighed down by guilt or shame. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple, she said softly, "You know, Dad, I used to think the worst thing in the world was losing Daniel. But now I see, the worst thing would have been losing myself." Her words struck me with quiet pride. She had grown through fire, and instead of crumbling, she had emerged steel strong. I smiled at her, my voice calm. "That's the true test, Emily. Life will always bring storms. But the measure of who we are is how we stand once the storm passes." We walked on in silence, the gravel crunching under our feet, the world peaceful around us. For the first time in a long time, I felt that peace had returned not just to our house, but to our hearts. Daniel had taken his punishment. Emily had found her freedom, and I, as a father, had done the one thing I promised myself long ago, to protect my family, not just with my hands, but with my wisdom. The chapter was closed. But the lesson, the legacy, would remain. Because in the end, this story was never about the safe in the basement or the gold bars that weren't real. It was about trust, betrayal, resilience, and love. It was about a daughter learning her worth, and a father proving that age is not weakness. It is strength refined. And so we move forward, not as victims of betrayal, but as survivors of it, stronger, wiser, untouchable.